Hello again and welcome back to the History Rescuer. Today I'm going to be doing another making history vintage video, and I'm going to be focusing on making an item called a Dutch liberation skirt. The end of World War II meant quite a bit for the Netherlands because the Netherlands was occupied by Nazi forces for several years. There are some incredible stories of hope and of resistance from the Dutch people at the time. And that's sort of where the National Liberation Skirt was born. So there was a woman named, okay, give me one moment, I need to get this right. Or as right as I can anyway. Her name was Adrienne Minette Boisevin van Lennep. Adrienne was a really prominent figure within the Dutch resistance, and she actually operated in sabotage operations, and her whole family was involved in one way or another in the resistance against Nazi occupation. And as a result, she ended up getting arrested for her actions by the Gestapo and placed in a cell. She was imprisoned and then eventually moved to and from various concentration camps throughout Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. During her imprisonment, she was smuggled a headscarf that was made out of patchwork pieces of clothing that reminded her of home, and that included pieces of fabric from her very first ball gown that she ever owned and pieces of fabric that came from the clothes of her children. Now, she suffered some tremendous tragedy as a result of the war. She lost her husband, she lost her children. Some of them were executed as a result of their involvement in the resistance, and so she actually suffered so much, and it's really, really incredible to see. At the end of the war, she joined a women's group that was dedicated to commemorating and also to rebuilding the Netherlands as a nation, and part of that came through the symbolism of this Dutch liberation skirt. So ultimately the skirt was meant to be a symbol for rebuilding and resilience and strength of womanhood through one's life and through extenuating circumstances. Adrienne actually toured the US to try and encourage this national liberation skirt trend to be taken up there. It was unsuccessful for the most part, but her aim was ultimately to have it be a global phenomenon. She wanted it to represent something for everyone and make it be something that was beyond her personal experiences in the war. She wanted it to be something that you carried through life. As she said herself, this is something for everybody. This is something that represents resilience for everyone and is meant to encourage you to view your life as a colorful tapestry. And so I would like to make my own version of this dress as a way of trying to use up some scraps, do some tactical recycling, and create something that is almost an heirloom piece. And I am being very mindful of the culture and the context behind the skirt when I'm making it. So let's get to it then. So in order to make my dress, I am going to have to crack into my Cabbage Patch, which is very exciting. Oh my goodness. So this year, 2020, marks the 75th anniversary of the ending of World War II. And this is one of the most significant events of the 20th century. It was celebrated in two parts because they were fighting on two fronts. There was the European campaign and the Pacific campaign. And the European campaign came to a close a couple of months prior to the Pacific campaign. So when victory in Europe was announced, there was widespread Allied celebrations throughout all of the countries involved. There was ticker tape in the streets. There were people flooding out from office buildings and dancing and kissing contests and singing through the night. There were fireworks. There was all of this kind of general revelry and relief felt by the nations involved. I swear there is some method to my madness. I have kind of caused a bit of chaos, but I've kind of got some rough piles of different sized chunks going at the moment, and then, random extra bits. And I think what I'm actually just going to do is start sewing bits together, and then when they start to get to almost dress-sized pattern piece chunks, I will start to work a little bit more finely and figure out what to do with it all. First one done. So I've put together my first few pieces. It's starting to look quite nice. I am going to have to go and iron it in a moment. I've been ironing all of the flat pieces as I do them in sets of 2 and then putting them onto the bigger piece. So this is my first one and I think it's going to actually be quite awesome, honestly. The skirt itself was meant to represent the rich tapestry of life for women and how throughout significant parts of their life they were able to wear this item of clothing that was patched from various items of other clothing that they'd worn. And it was to celebrate and mark different specific occasions. And so the way that it was put together was with various pieces of patchwork fabric. It was a recycled item of clothing that held tremendous sentimental value to the women who made it. It was meant to be hand-stitched, and the defining feature of a national liberation skirt was that it usually had orange or black triangles along the hem of the skirt, and one of them had to have embroidered on it the 5th of May 1945 because that was the day that the Dutch were liberated. It's starting to come together. We've definitely got something going on. Check it out, chili dog. That is looking rather cool to me. There's definitely patches that I wish I'd kind of planned a little bit more so far, but that's alright. I think you're gonna have highlights and lowlights, and I can always pleat some of this together so that it hides the chunks that I'm not so keen on anyway. You may notice that I use a lot of these odd trapezoidal pieces within this project and that I have a lot of them stashed in my cabbage patch. This is because at one point my mother, my nana and I were joining in on the fad that was started by the Tree Change dolls and were repainting those old shabby secondhand Bratz dolls and making little kids versions of Bratz dolls, and we were making little poppet dresses for them, and that's what this was for. And it was a project that I really enjoyed doing, and it reminds me of fun little crafting afternoons with my mum, my nana, and even at times my younger brother. Most of these fabrics that I have actually come from my nan's old gift shop. She used to run a craft store called The Gift of Herbs in the 80s, and when she decided to leave the business she brought a lot of the old stock home with her, and then, you know, when I grew up she gave it to me. So, and she really had an eye for fabulous fabric. She's not dead. She's still alive. Hi Nan, I know you're probably watching this. But it's really lovely to be able to combine these intergenerational little bits and pieces. And yeah, she's a really crafty person herself. She can knit, she can sew and crochet and arranges flowers like it's nobody's business, and her garden just seems to run wild. It's fabulous. I call her Witch Nana. So thanks for all the fabric and lace, Nana. Now I'm not quite sure how I'm going to use it yet, but I do have a particularly special piece of fabric that I'm hoping to include in this skirt, and that is this mangy looking gold bow. It is a small strip of fabric and I am probably going to undo the bow itself, but this was a decoration on the back of the chairs at my mum and dad's wedding, and my mum tried to throw it away a few years ago and I saved it from the garbage, and I haven't figured out what to do with it, but as a sentimental person I would like to have it included in my skirt. So because my gold fabric is very delicate, I've decided to back it with just a little bit of interfacing, and I'm actually going to satin stitch it onto a part of the dress when it's almost finished. So I'll figure out the placement for it later, but I just wanted to let you know that that's how I'm going to be doing this piece, because I really want it to look nice and even and not get little wrinkles in it or anything like that. So after a frankly ridiculous amount of sewing and ironing and quilting, I've put together, I would say roughly 1.5 meters, maybe 2 meters. Yeah, let's go 2 meters worth of quilted fabric bits and pieces. Bring it closer so you can get a hopefully better look at it. So this is what I'm going to make my skirt out of, and I think what I'm essentially going to do is just ruche it together or pleat it so that it sits nicely around like this. So I'm going to use a tartan on the back of it to sort of make a pleated back, to give it a vintage sort of boof at the back. But otherwise I think it's looking pretty good. There are so many little bits and pieces in this that mean something to me, that have come from old projects or outfits that I've worn to special events and things. A whole lot of stuff in there. Because I have a bit of an if it ain't broke attitude towards life and most of my creative projects, I decided to use the exact same pattern for the waistband that I used on the cottagecore skirt, which if you haven't seen, please go check it out. I did alter the waistband once again because I hate zippers, and I put instead 2 button closures, which allow me to have a bit of flexibility as my waist tends to expand and retract with the amount of churros that I eat. And I more or less just laid out the pattern pieces on top of my fabric and cut a back and a front for both, one from my fashion fabric and one from a lining fabric, and I also cut out 2 pieces of interfacing as well for the insides. I pinned my pleats by eye, sort of arranging them in a roughly equal arrangement on either side, and I left space at the back as well for the back panel of plaid that I did a 3 lines of basting stitch and then pleated together or ruched together just by pulling on the bottom threads, so that that was a nice even ruching and cinching in at the back. I struggled with my machine and the thread tension when it came to redoing my buttons, because God knows if I learn one skill once, I have to relearn it 1,000 times before it sticks. So most of that footage has been muted because otherwise it would be full of expletives and not very nice sounds. But I woke up the next morning and was in a much better mood and was able to satin stitch down the final gold love heart. After letting the skirt hang for 5 or so days, just to let the fabrics even out and stretch as they were going to thanks to gravity, I then trimmed down this skirt so that the hem would hang evenly And then after that, it was just a simple straight stitch to seal the final thing up and finish it. I have yet to begin embroidering the important personal dates and liberation date onto the skirt as yet, but I do intend to do so because the idea of this Feestrok or the liberation skirt is that it is a growing tapestry of one woman's life. I intend to continue to treat this object as a work in progress. So even though it's finished for now, it will continue to have different pieces added to it throughout its life in keeping with the original purpose of the skirt. So I hope you liked this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please feel free to check out any of my other making videos and like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments the kinds of events and fabrics you would add to your own Feestrok, and please, please, please tag me if you do make your own as well. I would love to see them. Thank you so much. This has been the History Rescuer. There's my first cosplay fabric, the final scrap of it that I used in both my very first cosplay, which was Tangled's Rapunzel, and also I used it as a front panel in my Anastasia gown, which I actually took to the Odyssey Masters cosplay competition. I got shortlisted for that, which is particularly amazing because I didn't even know I'd registered for the Masters competition. I thought I was just in the regular competition. Whoops!